Hey, Michael J.
So, a world without Oko, once upon a time in Vale. It's just nothing but all different decks now.
Well, sort of. I mean, some of the decks are still around, insofar as there were any decks before besides Oko decks. But I mean, like we're seeing black-green adventure, and we're seeing the Jeskai Fires of Invention deck, actually rise to prominence, right? Like this new form of Fires of Invention, which it's not the exact same as the versions people were playing back around the PT, but this new evolution of it is like the consensus. It's not prohibitive by any means, but it's the consensus deck to beat right now, kind of like the pace setter.
Yeah, it's if you look at the recent MTGO PTQ from earlier this week, 4 of the top 8 were Jeskai Fires decks, 3 of which were pretty similar to one another. Like you said, quite a bit different than the ones that we saw at Mythic Championship 6. And then one of them was kind of close to that build, but what's the big difference here, Patrick? New different technology.
Well, the big thing here is it's like, if you were going to summarize it, it's a move away from the fancy. It's just instead of like Fae of Wishes, instead of being built around having 2/3 of your sideboard dedicated to crazy costs of cards you can't play, with the plan being you're going to Fae of Wishes into them, the deck's just playing with some cards, including your boy, the Sphinx of Foresight. Sphinx of Foresight replacing Fae of Wishes, in fact, is the primary differentiator in the main deck.
I think Sphinx of Foresight in Jeskai Fires is correct. It is sweet, and I think that people will all move towards 4x Sphinx of Foresight. None of this 3 Sphinx of Foresight, which we see in some decks. None of this 0 Sphinx of Foresight. It's going to be all Sphinx of Foresight in our opening hands all the time.
So a couple of the reasons, if I were to hypothesize why Sphinx of Foresight has gained so much market share, the first and foremost is that Sphinx of Foresight is a card that costs more than Oko and yet makes a terrible elk. Right? Like Oko basically invalidated every card that costs more than it that doesn't do something immediately. And Sphinx of Foresight, even though it has the potential opening hand ability, just did not do enough to justify it being a 4-cost 3/3 elk.
Yeah, that's quite a bit of a differentiation between, we always, maybe not always, but we generally saw, at least at Mythic Championships 6, Cavalier of Flame and Cavalier of Gales, those guys both had really powerful comes into play abilities, right? So they're basically like drawing cards.
Yep.
and big actions happening with them, but not so for Sphinx of Foresight, outside of the opening hand thing. But I do think that opening hand thing, I mean, first of all, this card is kind of not great if it's not in your opening hand, but it's kind of fantastic in this strategy if it is in your opening hand.
Well, and that's part of what you're signing up for here with Sphinx of Foresight, is that you're like hoping that you can get enough mileage out of it to be worth the fact that when you have it in your opening hand, it's like you had a once upon a time. Like, stuff smooths out.
Yeah, so like the thing is, this deck is like 2 different decks, right? Like, if this deck has the card Fires of Invention on the battlefield, in particular on turn 4, this deck is one deck, and if this deck doesn't have Fires of Invention in play, whether it's turn 4 or not, this deck is like not the best example of a Jeskai.
No, it's sort of a very,
control deck we've ever seen, let's say.
It's not even a control deck. It has no counter spells and very little removal.
Yeah,
it's just a weird, clunky tap out deck.
Yeah,
right. Like you've got
really
5 sweepers. You got Solar Blaze and 4 Deafening Clarions. Those 5 sweepers. That's it. That's your removal. Other than the fact that, like, some of your threats, like, for instance, Bone Crusher Giant and Teferi Time Raveler, they can be used as interaction. But really what you're trying to do is you're just trying to drop Molokus and Kaigas as much as you can, But unlike Moloku and Kaiga, these threats are not prohibitively powerful compared to the opposing possibilities. They're many of them are good.
They're okay. I mean, like,
Most, they're good. They're good.
The Kenrith the Returned King is so good if you didn't pay any mana for it, i.e., you've got like 5 or 6 mana open, and like you can give your guys haste, or you can gain life, or you can draw cards. But man, if you're just tapping 5 for this guy, he is some kind of core set common. Am I right? Like just 5/5 for 5?
Yeah, but he's going to have haste for 1 extra mana a lot of the time.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, playing your cards for the actual costs in their corner is not where this deck wants to be. That's what I'm saying. Like, obviously, some of the cards are pretty good, right? Like, Teferi Time Reveler is an A+ card.
Yeah, it's the best thing going on for 3.
You know, Bone Crusher Giant. This guy it does good work. But
it's fantastic.
There's a reason that Cavalier of Flame and Cavalier of Gales are literally not played in any other decks, right? Like, these guys, they're like, I think to quote Patrick Chapin, they're like the Tristan Thompsons of this strategy. You know, they do what they do, and they do what they do in their lane, and you know, they don't do other things than that.
Well, I don't know how that is summed up as being Tristan Thompson. However, I will say that if you just think of it as Fires of Invention, when you play it and then immediately play something else, like, say, a Sphinx of Foresight or even a Bone Crusher Giant, you've just got a Black Lotus, 3 or 4 mana worth immediately, and then which paid for the Fires of Invention in the first place. And then on the next turn, if you just play 2 powerful cards, you've gotten so much that it's that tempo advantage is the thing this deck is aspiring to. And that's why the deck has 4 Sphinx of Foresight to dig to Fires of Invention and 3 Shimmer of Possibilities to dig to Fires of Invention. And even Cavalier of Flame and Cavalier of Gales, as far as your big threats go, part of the reason you're using Cavalier of Flame and Cavalier of Gales is that both of them give you a lot of digging to find Fires of Invention.
Absolutely.
Because there are a lot of other threats you could be playing.
Yeah.
Kenrith is a special case because, as you pointed out, that card is unbelievable if you didn't have to spend mana to play spells.
Oh, yeah. If you just have some guys out, you just slam Kenrith down there, give everybody haste, your opponent might just be dead. Right? Like, that's just how Kenrith rolls. You know what's great about Sphinx of Foresight in this deck, though, outside of just being in your opening hand? If you play Fires of Invention on turn 4, which perhaps the Sphinx of Foresight helped you get to, or perhaps helps you get to 4th land on turn 4 so that you would be able to cast the Fires of Invention initially, whatever the thing, you can just play the Sphinx of Foresight right behind the Fires, and it has like 2 special abilities. One of which is it costs 4. So all the other guys in this deck cost outside of Bone Crusher Giant, right? Just a special case there. Like everybody else costs like 5. So this is a card that you can just play the same turn you play Fires of Invention. And I think that it kind of takes the Drawn from Dreams role that previous versions of Jeskai Fires decks had. You know how like a lot of them had Drawn from Dreams? You're like, well, if I'm not paying any mana for my Dig Through Time, I might as well dig, right? But like Sphinx of Foresight takes that spot, eats up, 4 phantom mana, helps you defend yourself a little bit, right? So
that's the key. I think that's totally the key.
But it's not just that. It's still kind of Drawn from Dreams-ish in that because the Sphinx of Foresight has that additional scry ability, it can kind of help you dig to action for next turn.
A little. That's so small of a part of the puzzle.
It's
not nothing, but the blocking is so big. The fact that you're committing to the board, when you have no removal anymore, it's important to be really advancing the board. And this deck has so many big plays that advance the board now because that's how it's trying to contain things. It just plays big threats, big blockers, big interaction,
Yeah, I like this deck. I think it's kind of cool, but if it doesn't have Fires, it is just not. It's kind of not where I want to be. But when it does have Fires, it's exciting.
Dude, I gotta tell you, maybe I just need to learn some respect because all my experiences are built around the times in which I was playing a blue-green Oko deck with 4 Once Upon a Time and 4 Veil of Summer. But like playing against this deck, it did not seem good.
I mean,
I don't know. It's weird because maybe I'm just like biased from the fact that I just had 4 Aether Gust in my main deck. But I was just consistently in spots where I was just like happy they had Fires of Invention.
I played against this deck a ton with blue-green Oko decks also. I felt like they could have Fires of Invention in play, and it didn't stop me from winning. That's one thing. Although, like you, I think I Aether Gusted them a lot, which was fun. The most fun is when you Aether Gust them when they use their Castle Vantress on upkeep, because they're like, oh, I don't need to use any of my actual mana from my lands, so I'm gonna.
Oh yeah.
Oh man, you get them with fires on.
I did exactly that in the Pro Tour.
I've done that so many times. That's so fun. And then I've played against this deck a ton online with like Mono Blue Flash or whatever. That is not a difficult matchup. If they have a Teferi, it's difficult, but if they don't have a Teferi, they just basically all their cards cost 100.
So let's actually talk about that blue. Are you talking about blue-red Flash?
I was playing Mono Blue Flash, but there's blue-red Flash.
Mono Blue?
Yeah,
Mono. Yeah. So actually, this whole new breed of Flash, it's kind of interesting. You know, initially people were talking about blue-green Flash for obvious reasons, like the Nightpack Ambusher and so on. But the emergence of Mono Blue and particularly blue-red Flash has, I think, it's shaping up to be one of the important elements of the format. It's basically the only other way people are playing blue right now because nobody's found a good control deck. It's basically the only way people are playing. I shouldn't say nobody. Nobody's found a control deck that is so widely adopted that it's picking up steam. There are a lot of people doing well with like they're the only person in day 2 with their deck or whatever. But what did you like better, the Mono Blue? Like, for instance, the way that Todd Anderson has been advocating, that kind of harkens back to the previous, Curious Obsession deck, or the blue-red deck that's been gaining a lot of speed on MitGo, that is only sort of a Flash deck, but I mean, it's also sort of a God, how would you describe this? Because it's not even like a control deck. It's like an Ularade counterhammer deck.
So I think that if you're gonna play Mono Blue, I think you got to have a pretty good reason for it. So I was playing it a lot on MTG Arena, but largely because, especially at the time when I started playing a lot, I just didn't have a huge collection. If card availability isn't a problem for you, then I think Mono Blue might not necessarily be where you want to go. Like, this is not a powerful deck. So you win a lot of blowouts, right? So there's decks that don't set up very well, and if you go like first turn Spectral Sailor or Terramander and then just counter literally every single thing that they do because they don't have efficient removal spells, like we were talking about that Jeskai Fires deck a second ago, like that deck is not particularly well set up to interact with like high quality, efficient 1 and 2 casting cost cards like Brineborn Cutthroat, Terramander, and Spectral Sailor. And then like once you get to like turn 3-4, if they don't have Fires of Invention in play, you just destroy them. You can just like counter every single thing, and then you start drawing extra cards of Spectral Sailor, etc. But the problem is, like, this strategy is atrocious if your opponent has certain cards. And unfortunately,
like
some of those cards are incredibly common, like Gilded Goose. Like, half the guys can't get through a Gilded Goose on defense. Like, that's kind of a problem. And
well, I don't know about half the guys, because at the end of the day, if you're just talking about Terramander and Spectral Sailor, Todd Anderson only played 2 Terramanders, and one of his observations was that it sucks. They just get blocked by Gilded Goose, so you should just replace them. Spectral Sailor is a different case. The fact that it draws cards.
Yeah, so one of the problems that I found was that, and then separately, you can have problems closing out. So like you can have an advantage, like a material advantage, where you have like good power. Here's a really good example. Brineborn Cutthroat can be huge, but the guy doesn't have any evasion, right? So you could have like a 2019 Brineborn Cutthroat that just doesn't get through a Cauldron Familiar, right? So that's a problem. And the thing is that like the deck is not particularly well set up to interact with sweet permanents on the battlefield. So if people have things like Trail of Crumbs and Witch's Oven, which are extraordinarily common and unfortunately also very cheap, right? They cost like 1 and 2 mana. Like you can get an advantage, but if they're just like holding off your damage a little bit, they're gonna be able to, at least a lot of the time I found, just chip shot you for a couple life points with Cauldron Familiar to stay alive, even though you were beaten up a little bit, and then their mid and their late game turns are just unbelievable, right? They're like drawing 3 cards a turn, they're just getting all this extra material, and you know you're spending legitimate mana if you want to draw extra cards, whether it's with Gadwick or with Spectral Sailor. I find that as an issue.
No, I think that's the biggest issue. To me, that's the part I can't get past the black green problem. The combination of the Cauldron, the Witch, the Massacre Girl, there's just powerful other threats, and the way a lot of the stuff that the black green decks are doing lines up against you. I just don't see the tools being there. Although I did want to note that Gadwick is actually the thing I think has the most promise there. I think Gadwick can actually let you power through the blockers and get enough power to actually go over the top. But I think that Gatwick, despite the fact that you would think Gatwick can be used so well in a mono blue deck because of its blue tap ability, which is quite underrated, by the way, I actually think Gadwick's one of the keys to the format and one of the absolute best cards, like the cards that have gained the most from the bans, and is going to be one of the defining pillars of the format. And I think that it's better used if you're going to play some sort of an aggressive Gadwick deck. It's actually better used in a blue-red deck, like maybe next time's Mitgo 5-0 daily list, or 5-0, daily list. So this list, instead of using the little dinky creatures, it still has the Cutthroat and the Borrower. Obviously Brazen Borrower is just an unbelievable rate. And Brineborn Cutthroat works so well with the sort of playing with lots of instants strategy. But it actually works a lot better here because of the burn. And then all the other creatures are cut, and the only creature the only creatures added to replace them are a full play set of 4 Gadwicks and then 4 Bone Crusher Giants. And Bone Crusher Giant, obviously fantastic card to begin with, but there's a lot of value from it being doing the stomp as an additional burn spell, and then Gadwick the Wizened is like how this deck really pulls ahead. This is this deck's Hydroid Crassus. For 4 mana, you can just play it on turn 4 as a 3/3 that draws a card, and it's a threat that has to be dealt with because it could just keep tapping things, right? But if the game stretches, Gadwick can completely take over. And then the Bone Crusher Giant's 2 damage is really interesting here. Not only is there 2 damage from Shock and 2 damage from Bone Crusher Giant, there's 3 damage from Rowl's Outburst, which I think is a card that really stands to benefit in the new world. More people should be playing Rowl's Outburst. Isn't this just like a pretty great way to interact with with different threats and keep it moving, keep building an advantage?
Oh yeah, I absolutely agree about Rowl's Outburst. First of all, people are not particularly well set up to deal with. I'm not even sure if is card advantage the right word, right? Like, this is a card that's kind of like a card drawing, card selection spell, but it's also putting pressure on the opponent in a way that they're just like not set up for it. You remember when there used to be just like lightning strikes in some versions of like Snapcaster Mage decks in Standard, and you wouldn't think of them as like, oh well, whatever, he's got a couple of lightning strikes, but then there's just mid and late game, and there was so much pressure on your life total, and you didn't realize how it snuck up on you. Like, I think like Rouse
Outburst, this deck has 4 Ionize.
Like, totally just like puts you in a situation where you're like, oh shoot, what happened? Right? We were just taking turns, and you say go, and then like, oh man, I'm on 12. Like, 12 isn't like a tiny amount of life total, but like he didn't spend anything. Right? He just like drew an extra card or traded 1 for 1 theoretically.
Well, yeah, and in fact, it can actually really sneak up on you when, like, let's say your opponent, you already managed to keep Fires of Invention off the table because of a timely negate or quench or whatever, they tap out to play like a Cavalier, and you respond with a Brineborn Cutthroat, and then an Ionize. So they take 2 from the Ionize, the Cutthroat goes up to 3/2, and then you untap and then you Rouse Outburst them and shock them. That's 5 damage there. They're down to 5, and the Cutthroat's up to 5/4 and hits for the kill.
Oh man, I love, playing the Cutthroat as like the kind of the stopgap spell. Like you're gonna counter their thing anyway, you're just gonna remove their thing anyway, but you just getting that little extra bump on him. It's so good.
And all that burn can really come down on you fast if they stick a Gatwick. Because like if you and your opponent both been sitting around, you both have 7 cards, then suddenly they just like shoot, a couple burn spells at you. Like they use the Bone Crusher Giant for 2 and shock your face and Rouse Outburst you, and you're like, okay, I'll take 7, I guess. And then they untap and Gatwick, and you're like, oh, I see.
I think the ability to play proactively in this deck is oddly stronger than in the mono blue deck. Gatwick has that clause whenever you cast a blue spell, tap target non-land permanent and opponent controls. Like you'd think that a deck that's like all blue would be really good at setting that up, but this deck has got 4 copies of Gatwick, and the thing is like you actually have like the Bone Crusher Giants hit harder than any creature in the mono blue deck, with the potential exception of Brineborn Cutthroat that's been buffed a couple of times. So it's just like opting a few times to get their blockers out of the way actually just lines up a ton of damage here.
Yeah. Yeah, so I like this blue-red deck. I think I don't think it's done cooking yet either. I think it's going to get better.
You think this is what I should sleeve up, the four Gadwicks? I'll do it, man.
Well, I think you should sleeve up. I think you should sleeve up Gadwicks regardless of what you play. My first, second, third, fourth choice, all Gadwick decks.
Do you like blue-white? Do you like, Esper, Bant, Gadwick decks, or do you like...
Yeah.
Yeah?
So the only thing that gives me pause with the Esper Gatwick deck, because I play 4 Gadwicks in my Esper deck.
Ooh.
Yeah.
You mean business.
I do. I'm serious about Gatwick. I think Gatwick is the new Hydroid Crassus.
I'm going to invest in some I think I only own 2. I better get some more.
I'm 4 Gatwicks in these decks. Now, my biggest issue with the Esper style is that I think you got to play Time Wipe, because I think Time Wipe Gatwick is just unreal.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I'll Time Wipe anything. I think Time Wipe Realm Cloak Giant is the cutest, but, I don't know if you went that direction in your Esper.
I think it's okay. It's something to keep in mind. It depends on how many Time Wipes you can get away with. I think you should play 4 Time Wipes. I think you could consider a Realm Giant or 2. I don't think it's out of the question to play a lot of that stuff. I think that the ability to Time Wipe your Murderous Rider, if you play it, or Brazen Borrower, that's enough to make up for the times you don't already have Gatwick. I just think that Time Wiping your Gatwick is just a winning play so much. The other thing that I think is important to remember about Gatwick in a blue-white deck or an Esper deck is that I think that Teferi bounce my own Gatwick. It's like it's just too unbelievable.
Just bouncing your Gatwick with a Teferi. You don't have to do a metaphor. Everybody understands how insane that is. Especially if your Teferi didn't go away, like it has any amount of remaining loyalty when you make that play, nobody's going to stop you from replaying the Gatwick.
Right.
I think like Gatwick is so strong in some of the situations that you described, or I mean any of those guys are strong in the situations you described, in part because like nobody has permission. Like what's permission now? Like
actually I don't know. More people No. More people have permission than before by far. Like, we just talked about him on a blue deck that has 15 counterspells in it. It's got he played 4 Hypnotic Sprite, 3 Sinister Sabotage, 3 Quench, 3 Essence Capture. So that's 13, right? No, actually, I'm sorry. He played 4 Quench, 3 Essence Capture, 3 Sinister Sabotage, 4 of the Hypnotic Sprite. So that's 14. And then the blue-red deck had 4 Ionize, 2 Negate, and 3 Quench, which is 9. So it's not like people aren't playing Permission. I think the fact that Veil of Summer is out of the way has really brought back a fair bit of Permission, but that does mean a couple things. First of all, it's important to keep in mind that the Permission is all very mediocre. Nobody really has good counterspells.
Essence Capture is great in Mono Blue Beatdown. It is very good in that deck.
I mean, it's okay. It's not like it's... First of all, you're playing a Teferi deck. It's not like Essence Capture's the thing you're worried about.
That's fair. That's fair.
I mean, yeah, they could Essence Capture your Gatwick if you're not careful, but...
I mean, if you resolve your Teferi against Strong Sad's deck, he's in big problems. He can't even buff his Brineborn Cutthroat anymore. He's got to try to main phase his Brazen Borrower against you.
So, I mean, there's a few cards out there. Essence Capture, Negate, Dovin's Veto, Absorb, Sinister Sabotage. But, Veil of Summer...
Those high-quality counterspells, Negates and Dovin's Vetoes, etc., don't even counter Gatwick.
No. The other thing, though, is that I think that if you play Esper, even if you just play a little bit of black, you don't have to play very much black to make Thought Erasure fantastic. I think Thought Erasure's ability to smooth your draw out early in the game, as well as clear the way so that you can go 2 Thought Erasure into 3 Teferi, or use Thought Erasure to ensure that Gatwick sticks, or use Thought Erasure to ensure that to just help attrition so that you're both low in cards. Their last card is is some random threat, and your last card is Gatwick.
Or, I mean, you could just attrition to 0 on both sides, but the Thought Erasure put a spell on top of your deck is probably okay also. Right? Especially if that spell is Gatwick, because then you're going to hit your land drops also.
Also, Thought Erasure bouncing. I mean, and that combined with bounce, when you've got Brazen Borrowers and Teferi Time Ravelers, and even access to Tyrant Scorn, because I think Tyrant Scorn is actually a pretty underrated removal spell right now. It's pretty efficient on mana to begin with, but the ability to bounce your own Gatwick is just...
What happened to Tyrant Scorn? That card was all over Standard a few months ago, because no one has heard from it in months.
Well, I think Oko. It was really just about Oko.
So, my absolute favorite thing about...
Oh, no, I'm sorry. The other thing is Veil of Summer.
Yeah, well, my absolute favorite thing about Thought Erasure, I was going to say, is Veil of Summer. Now that there's not Veil of Summer, how bad is Veil of Summer versus Thought Erasure? It's so bad.
It's brutal.
It's so bad.
But it's out of the way.
I know.
And that's why Thought Erasure and Tyrant Scorn are both not banned anymore.
I would have never thought that I would have empathy for Thought Erasure players. Because I think, Thought Erasure players, I'm not saying they're bad people, right? But that's not a friendly thing to do. That's not a thing you do in a friendly game of Magic, right? This is you're a killer when you're casting that card. But I felt bad for them, each and every one of them, in a format where everybody's got 4 Veil of Summer. They're just trying to hit their land drops, Patrick. That's all they're trying to do here.
Dude, what do you think? Speaking of cards that were banned by Veil of Summer and are now unbanned, how about Mortify, man? Mortify seems sweet. So first of all, lots of people have creatures, and many of them are worth killing, right? It's like mortifying somebody's Sphinx of Foresight. You get in the better of it. But also mortify Fires of Invention. Yeah. Mortify Trail of Crumbs.
Yeah, I mean,
mortify Wilderness Reclamation.
Mortify Fires of Invention. You got me. I think that
mortify Prison Realm.
Mortify Prison Realm, huh?
Yeah, why not?
That's all right. That's cute.
If they're prison roaming your Teferi or whatever.
Yeah, that's cute. I think Mortify probably gained some because of the popularity of Fires of Invention, but I think that it was probably a little unpopular for a while just because it was in competition on the mana and a lot of the utility, right? Not obviously 100% does Oath of Kaya doesn't kill enchantments, but I think those two cards were kind of in competition at a time when Oath of Kaya was potentially teaming up with Dance of the Manse. And I think you're probably making a pretty good point, which is that Mortify is contextually very good in the format right now. In terms of you're actually gaining mana also, right? These enchantments people are playing cost 4.
Yeah, I mean, Oath of Kaya is a slightly better card on rate. I like a mix personally. But you're right. Normally, Mortify is held back by the fact that you have to, compare Oath of Kaya or Mortify. I like a mix, but I do think that the option to hit enchantments and the option to play at instant speed is much appreciated.
Yeah.
And I recommend not playing Dance of the Manse, so Oath of Kaya's enchantment part is a little less valuable. I do think, though, that Mortify, compared to Murderous Rider, is an interesting question. And the biggest thing, normally, I think Murderous Rider is just its rate is just at a whole other level.
Murderous Rider is, I can't compare those two cards. Like, as good as Mortify is in certain situations, like, Murderous Rider just kills, like, Liliana and Garrick.
Sure, but here's the reason why I think Mortify might have more reason to live in these Esper decks. I am so into 4 Gatwicks, and I think that Time Wipe is really good. And I think when you're playing blue, 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 white, white, it's hard for an Esper deck to have triple blue and double white and double black early and reliable. So I'm not sure how much Murderous Rider you can actually rely on, because I don't know what your mana base looks like if you're playing, because remember, the only temple, the only Scryland you have access to is Temple of Silence, which is not
worst.
It's the worst one for these people. And
if you're a triple blue guy,
if you're a Gatwick deck, man, is Temple of Silence not something you can load up on. And besides, the only way you can pull off the mana base is a Fabled Passage mana base. And if you're playing Fabled Passage, it implies you're going to be playing some number of plains and swamps. So already you're putting more pressure on your Gatwick. Because you can play some of that stuff, but it's hard to play very much of it. So playing a Temple of Silence is rough.
I don't know, man. I think you've just convinced me to be just straight Azorius. Like, why even... Like, do you really need
Thought Erasure
so much?
I don't know that you need them. I would love to live in the world, given how... The only thing I don't like about this Esper deck is the mana, but I don't like the mana. So if you could find a way to make it 85% as good with blue-white, I would sign up.
Yeah, but I mean, you could even be like a 27+ land deck with just a ton of castles to like make up for the fact you have too much land. First of all,
that's not the part you're talking about for the Esper deck.
No, if I were just like straight blue-white.
That's not the part. Yeah, I would play a ton of castles for sure, but that's not the part that gives me pause. Thought Erasure and Tyrant Scorn are the two that are just, there is no analog in the blue-white deck.
Yeah.
Tyrant Scorn is so much better of removal for cheap removal than they have, and Thought Erasure is better than any of their permission. The fact that you lose Mortify, Oath of Kaya, maybe Murderous Rider, or the option of Liliana if you want it, all that matters. But to me, those are easy to walk away from compared to just play some alternatives. Like maybe I just have some other, maybe I have Realm Cloak Giant instead of Liliana or something, or Ugin, right? Like there's options. But just tell me what you're going to play instead of Thought Erasure or Tyrant Scorn.
Because you just love Tyrant Scorn's bounce ability here, right?
Like, okay, so if you're going to play straight blue-white, which I think is defensible, and in fact, I would love to live in the world where it's better. If you're going to play straight blue-white, I like Aether Gust as part of my removal package.
In the main deck.
In the main deck. I'm still main deck Aether Gust.
Well, there are plenty of... I mean, I guess the top 8 of the PTQ...
Who's it not good against?
Had 4 Fires and Inventions decks in the top 8 and 4 cat food decks. So I guess every one of those cat food decks had some kind of expensive green permanent, right? Like whether it was a Garrick or
Nissa.
Yeah, or like, some kind of a wolf or something, like something you'd be, worth spending an Aether Gust on.
Okay, so the top 8 most played archetypes at Twitch Rivals. Number 1, Jeskai Fires. It's great there, right?
Yeah.
Number 2, Rakdos Knights.
Oh, Aether Gust is good there.
Oh, yeah. Number 3, Jund Sacrifice.
It's fantastic there. Like, those guys have Kovold.
Number 4, Golgari Adventure.
Pretty good there. Depends on their build, but pretty good there, I think.
Number 5, Temur Reclamation.
I mean, it's insane there, right?
Number 6, Gruul Aggro.
I mean, that's actually the blueprint of the deck that you want Aether Gust against. Like, I didn't even play I didn't even play the Voracious Hydra when I played Blue Green Oko because I was just like, for Aether Gust, I just rather have them against Gruul. It's more consistent.
Number 7, Rakdos Sacrifice.
It's good. It's not as good as against Gruul. But
not even close as good, but it's still good enough, right? It's decent.
Taking a Mayhem Devil or something, but that's not that exciting.
No, it's not that exciting, but it gets you your money for 2 mana, and in blue-white, your options are so lean.
Yeah.
Number 8, Mono Red Aggro.
It's phenomenal there. Like they have so few cards that are generating leverage. So if you're like nail their Torbrand or nail their Embercleave, whatever their big spell is, like you basically time walk them.
So like not only is it like good to great against the 8 most popular decks, the decks where it's not actually good, most of them are like card advantage battles of sorts where whatever 2-cost removal spell you had wasn't going to be very good anyway. Now, granted, if you ever face somebody playing mono blue or like Todd Anderson, or you play against somebody playing like mono white aggro or mostly white aggro, you're going to look a little silly. But like for the most part, Aether Gust seems like a fantastic metagame call right now, at least in some number.
I mean, are you going to play like a couple, like 1 or 2 or something in the main, and then
I don't know.
I would in the sideboard.
I don't know. I mean, so maybe it's like hedging too much, but I was thinking of starting with like at least 2 or 3 and seeing how they work. Because like I just don't know what cards that cost less than 3 I would ever want to play in a blue-white deck. They all suck.
So what about like, jumpstart card draw? Like you can also use that to filter away Aether Gusts and bad matchups, no?
Nah.
So
if I was going to filter away, I want to use Chemister's Insight.
What about your boy, God Eternal Kefnet? How about that guy was your boy?
But dude, that's not the problem. Okay, if you're going to play Azorius, your big game is going to be good. You get as many Castle Vantresses and Castle Ardenvales as you want for
all
free.
Of them, like 5.
Right. Second of all, and I only play 4 incidentally because I just think that you can get flooded on that stuff. But it doesn't matter. You can play as many as you want. And then you also have Gatwick, Mass Manipulation, Chemister's Insight, Teferi, Brazen Borrower. The fact that you could like Gatwick and then bounce it again with Time Wipe, or Teferi. I don't think your big plan is the problem. I just want to know what cards you're going to play that cost less than 3 that actually affect the board. I like Opt better than Radical Idea.
I mean,
and I think
all other things held equal, Opt is a much stronger card than Radical Idea. Radical Idea's bonus is just you can get rid of Aether Gust you don't want.
Yeah, but you can do that with Chemister's Insight. I just don't want to waste mana when you have all these castles and stuff. It's not like you. Who wants to spend their mana Radical IDing? Like, I think that I want to know how you're going to affect the board for less than 3. I think Prison Realm is like a decent 3 play, and Teferi is obviously excellent. But like for affecting people on turn 2, you've got Brazen Borrower and then Crickets. I mean, Dovin's Veto is a great card, but it doesn't really help you against creatures.
Like 75% of their threats are going to be immune to Dovin's Veto. I think that your argumentation here is just pushing me towards the blue-red version. Like, this deck is lean, has great interaction, it's cheap, and it forces people to play at your speed.
The only thing about the white, though, there's a couple things that are kind of nice, which is that... So I think Absorb versus Ionize, not the biggest difference. I have a slight preference for Absorb, but they're close.
Yeah, but Ionize is just so on brand for what this deck wants to do.
Yeah, but Absorb is so on brand for what this deck wants to do.
I agree.
And Absorb is a slightly stronger card.
Yeah, I mean, all other things held equal, just randomly dealing 2 doesn't do anything, but randomly gaining 3 is meaningful card advantage in some matchups.
But then if you look at the rest, it's like the difference. Dovin's Veto, slight upgrade over Negate, not that big of a deal.
Minor.
Minor, right. But then Prison Realm is like a quality form of interaction, but you could say, oh, but Bone Crusher Giant's better, and I'll give you that.
Well,
But
Bone
how
Crusher
are you making
Giant
up for the...
is better in like random situations, but Prison Realm is much, much better if you're trying to do something specific, right?
But like nothing in the red gives you is as good as Teferi.
Yeah.
And then Time Wipe is so good for you.
Like especially
it's not like,
in the strategy, right? Like if you're
that's
like
what I'm... Yes.
wiping Gadwicks, wiping Giants, that's like I just like stay up at night staring at the ceiling imagining looping Time Wipes on sweet creatures. And I just can't sleep because it's so engaging.
So I don't know, man. If you can find me some cheap cards, I'll sign up for blue-white. But that's the thing I think you're missing. Maybe it's just play with some really mediocre ones like Quench or something. I just don't want to be a person who plays Quench.
I don't like Quench either. The other option is you could just play like garbagey permanents that draw cards that like get you to the next phase, right? Like that's what the Esper deck was doing before. You know, you could just play all these eggs that are fixing your mana, drawing you the next card.
I don't want to tap out that way. I think the counterspells are pretty good. Although, dude, what if we just play blue-black? We do lose Time Wipe, but like I think you can make up some of the ground from Time Wipe with like Liliana and like Ritual of Soot and maybe Cry of Carnarium, who knows? But like, yeah, it sucks to not have Teferi Time Raveler. True. But you have other cards that cost 3 that are at least decent. And the fact that you pick up Tyrant Scorn and Thought Erasure so that your 2-mana plays are like go from horrible to fantastic. Why isn't that deck good?
I think about blue-black a lot. If I'm going blue-black, these are the things that are going through my head. I get sad every time I think about having Ritual Soot in my deck. I don't love it. But, you know, it certainly has...
You might not even want to main deck those either, because, like, Brazen Borrower and Murderous Rider both cost 3.
Yeah.
And Gatwick. Gatwick costs 3 also. Ritual Soot doesn't sound that good.
It does mess up people who are playing Nissa, right? So I do like that. But generally speaking, I just get a little sad when I think about it. But if I'm going blue-black, I don't know if I want to go Gadwick. Like... I feel like blue-black is the home of Augur of Bolus. It's the home of God Eternal Kefnet. Like, you put those...
Dude, I'm off God Eternal Kefnet.
Yeah, it's just... Look, the incentives to that deck are pulling you in a different direction than, I think, blue-red and blue-white. Like, blue-red and blue-white are like, hey, we can showcase this thing. Although, I guess blue-black has many options for recovering dead Gadwicks. Right? Like, that's almost as cool as time wiping Gadwicks, right? Like, so,
I mean, you still have Tyrant Scorn.
Yeah. But I also think like blue-black has got like the highest quality finishers of the 3. Like, if you just want to like, all right, here's a class of cards that I'm just trying to win with. Like, hard to pass up Liliana, I think.
I think Gadwick's better.
No, I mean, just like Gadwick doesn't really fight by himself, right? Like you want like a way. Like, Gadwick is like a bridge to the win, right? Liliana is the win.
I guess. I don't know, man. The only reason that I'm not just like, yeah, okay. So one, Liliana is a good card, and I think its ability to add as a sweeper and its ability to help end the game, all that's much appreciated. I think you can just win with Gadwicks. But that said, I don't know why you wouldn't play Brazen Borrowers and maybe Murderous Riders. You know, like why not?
I mean, those are high-quality cards.
They're just so good.
The reason I like the blue-red deck the way that you brought it up originally is just... I mean, if I'm Morale's outbursting and triggering Gadwick at the same time, that's a lot of damage, right? Like, that stuff teams up really, really nicely.
I do think blue-red is the best place for Gatwick. I want to play Gatwick everywhere, but I think blue-red is definitely the best place for it.
Do you know what's missing from this blue-red strategy, I think? What if you just, like, packed, like, between 2 and 4 copies of the 6 casting cost Chandra? Like, maybe even just in your sideboard. Like,
that's interesting.
because like this version, like if you're just,
I had the first one goes a long way.
if you like heads up against like Esper or blue white, like this deck is definitely behind. If everybody's all like, all right, we've got our four Gadwicks, like what else is everybody doing? Blue white's just gonna have better castle game than you, like as good or better, and they have like all these cards to just undo what you do. Like you were talking about before, absorbs rate versus ionizes rate, right? Like the last absorb is really, really, really meaningful, and the first ionize doesn't do anything, right? So like they have all this stuff that just kind of like, oh well, we're all doing all this stuff, but my deck is built to like super exploit long game Gadwick. I'm time wiping Gadwick. I'm doing all kinds of nonsense. And at some point, like your Brazen Borrowers and your Bone Crusher Giants just aren't powerful, right? Like those cards are really, really good if you're sneaking the front side through somebody's mana, or you're just like, getting them with like some damage between turns like 4 and 7 or something. But at some point in the game, their board is set up. They're casting 10 mana worth of stuff every turn. You're not impressing anybody with your 2/1 flash card.
Yeah, but blue-black is still beating both of them. When you can just surgical pick apart their hand, and then when your removal spells are Tyrant Scorn and Murderous Rider, where they're actually good instead of bad.
Yeah, that's true.
What did you think of the...
I'm just thinking if you drop that Chandra, like nobody beats
Oh,
that.
yeah. No, I think that's a great idea.
Never, ever.
I kind of like the idea of playing at least one Chandra main deck, possibly two, possibly just 1+1. I think I would start at 1+1, but that's a really exciting idea. And I could imagine two being just like a great way to kind of like just trump the matchup.
What do you think about Mystical Dispute in the main deck? Like 1 or 2?
I don't like it yet, but I could imagine it. I think it's okay. It's tough. Maybe. Right now, so out of those 8 most popular decks, do you remember how many of them are blue? Just Fires of Invention and Team of Reclamation, which is not even a real deck. I mean, people play it, but it's so bad.
Oh, I mean, and you can't even easily Mystical Dispute the Wilderness Reclamation. It's kind of awkward.
So I don't like Mystical Dispute yet, but there will come a time in the format. I'm curious, what do you think of Golgari Sacrifice, such as the way that Jibri Thomas won the Invitational Qualifier with? Okay, notable elements. So obviously, you just got to kind of fill out the deck a little bit now that there's no Once Upon a Time. But notable elements include a top end of 2 Casualties of War as the big. No Lilianas or Ugins, but and no Nissas either. But just staying with Casualties of War, which was one of the things that everybody talked about back at the PT as the breakout tech, continuing to use it here. And then the other part that I was curious of is your thoughts on 3 Cauldron Familiar instead of 4.
All right, so I'd actually go further. Like if you look at how Batut Inha came in second in the PTQ with just with the Golgari Sacrifice deck, so the other cat food decks in the top 8 were all Jund Sacrifice. Batutinha was the highest performing at second place, 4 Casualties of War. And the interesting thing here is that the 3, because Batutinha did not play red, so didn't have Mayhem Devil, played 3 copies of Thrashing Brontodon in the main deck. I think if I were... I
love that.
Like, I think that if I were going to go with the Sacrifice deck, I would start with this version. And the more I thought about it, the more I was in love with 4 Casualties of War. I think, like, Casualties of War is so insane in the mirror match, right? Like, can you just rattle off, like, Artifact, Witch's Oven, Creature, so many good creatures that are played in the mirror or in any decks, more or less. Enchantment, Trail of Crumbs, Fires of Invention, Prison Realm, land. There's tons of castles. It's any land, whatever. This is just like a toss-in for when you're destroying somebody. And then Planeswalkers. The only thing I didn't like about Batutinha's deck was that there's no Vraska. Like, I would definitely play Vraska if I was playing this strategy. Now, on your second question about playing only 3 Cauldron Familiar, that's crazy talk to me. Like, I mean, Cauldron Familiar is like it's the thing. Like it's how you don't get run over. It's actually your payoff. And in the mid game, I mean, it's like your primary source of value around food. Like, I mean, I get like, especially if you're playing this. This deck doesn't have any Golgari Queens to chomp on the food. So, what are you going to do with your food otherwise?
Well, you could be like Lee McLeod, who played Sultai Sacrifice. What's the Sultai for with no Oko? Emery, Lurker of the Lock, X4. So Emery, which obviously, first of all, gets cheaper from food, right? But
it's real cheap, down to 1.
Second of all, the mill is kind of interesting at finding Cauldron Familiars. But this deck also has 2 copies of your beloved Feasting Troll King, which is kind of an interesting card to be able to potentially mill.
Yeah.
And then the really exciting part, 3, the Great Henge. And obviously, let Emery, by the way, not only does Emery dig to Cauldron Familiar, it also digs to Witch's Oven.
Yeah, so it also digs...
You could just tap it to play Witch's Oven out of your graveyard.
Yeah, it also digs to Vantress Gargoyle, which I think is a unique element of this deck also. So, I think that...
And then finally, 3 copies of the Great Henge, though.
Well, if you're going to play, like, look, Vantress Gargoyle costs 2 mana, right? So you've got a 5-power creature for 2. The Great Henge suddenly starts getting pretty economical if you're doing that kind of stuff. I think this
you can just go Gargoyle. Like, if you play the Gargoyle, the Henge only costs 4? That's so good.
Yeah.
And you get 2 of it back.
So, I think that this deck is a special case because I think Feasting Troll King is hella mediocre in a lot of decks, but in a deck that has Emery, it's different because you're actually... You might be playing the Feasting Troll King from the bottom up to begin with, which is unusual in most decks, right? So here with Vantress Gargoyle and Emery, you have that other element. Now, obviously, if you have like a sizable source of food from Witch's Oven, Trail of Crumbs, whatever else, then Feasting Troll King is like a super inevitable threat. But
it's also a nice 6 to follow a Castle Garenbrig with.
Yeah, that's the script, I think. Like, that's the thing to do. I'm a little kind of head scratchy on a lot of these Wicked Wolf decks now. Like, this deck doesn't seem to me like a great Wicked Wolf deck.
It's got 4 Trail of Crumbs.
Yeah.
And it's got 4 Witch's Ovens.
Yeah. It's fine. Like, I feel like I at the 4, I might be more interested in playing more copies of Vraska. Like, I'm not saying that I wouldn't play, like, any Wicked Wolves, or, like, maybe I'd definitely have 4 Wicked Wolves after sideboarding, access to them at least, but, like, Vraska seems like the payoff is going to be way more consistent. I'm going to be able to do stuff for successive turns. It's going to defend me really well. It's a source of potential life gain and card advantage. Versus, I think, like, a lot of the Wicked Wolves in this deck, I think, are going to be, like, pretty mediocre. Like, that card, without a food in play, it often dies. If you're getting it.
Yeah, but this deck has so much food, right? Like 4 Witch's Oven, 4 Trail of Crumbs, 4 Gilded Goose, 2 Feasting Troll King. How much more food do you want? It's even got Emery, Lurker of the Lock, which is deceptively food-oriented because you could easily mill Witch's Oven. And then when you have Emery, you have the ability to just tap Emery, get back Witch's Oven, and you're back in business.
That is cool.
And this is a deck that makes 2 food off its Witch's Oven more than most. Between Vantress Gargoyle, Feasting Troll King, Wicked Wolf, Lovestruck Beast, like this deck just has so many ways to put, to get 2 meals out of one sacrifice.
I think rebuying that Vantress Gargoyle a bunch is going to be cute, too.
This deck is sweet. This is like my favorite deck of the weekend.
I think it is cool. I completely agree. What do you think about, like, 3 Shifting Ceratops and only 1 Questing Beast in the sideboard? That's not something that I expected.
Uh, uh, yeah, I would pick different numbers. I I I'm okay with a little bit of shifting Ceratops action, but I want some more questing beast action.
I think that Questing Beast.
I love the Brontodons though.
Questing Beast is so good right now. Like, look at this deck. It's got like Emery, and it's got like the 1/1 from Lovestruck Beast. It's got Gilded Goose. It's got Cauldron Familiar. Now, nobody's saying there's no way to defend itself, right? Like Vantress Gargoyle and Feasting Troll King and the 5/5 part of Lovestruck Beast can all defend against the Questing Beast. But the reality is, a lot of it can't. Right? Like, you just draw like the wrong combination of creatures. That guy comes across the red zone and eats your planeswalker. Yum, yum, yum.
I do like shifting Ceratops though. I would just play both.
I mean, shifting Ceratops, if you think that other people are also going to be playing Vantress Gargoyle, shifting Ceratops is pretty good. Like,
dude, with all if oh,
it's just not a fight, right? You don't want Questing Beasts against Vantress Gargoyle. That's a terrible fight.
No. I also just think you want shifting Ceratops against all these 15 counterspell, 14 counterspell, mono blue or blue red or blue white, like all those decks.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just fantastic there.
Are there like too many just dudes in the sideboard though? Like, there's like 3 shifting Ceratops and a Questing Beast, which are like very similar in cost and function, right? Like they're forecasting haste or sometimes haste or sometimes
no, I think they really,
guys.
I think that they really do have different spots, different moments.
Yeah, but these are guys that you're bringing in from the sideboard for offensive purposes. Like both of them. These are like offensive gear shifting creatures, shifting Ceratops and Questing Beast. This deck also has 4 Rotting Regisaur. I mean, like Rotting Regisaur.
I think you need the Rotting Regisaur against the red decks though, right? And the night decks.
Do you?
I think so.
I can tell you from a lifetime of experience that the red decks are not particularly happy fighting Thrashing Brontodon. Like, it's obviously Rotting Regisaur.
That's true.
Bigger,
I'll give you that. I don't know that you need 4 Rotting Regisaur. That's true. When you have Brontodon, I hadn't considered the Brontodon aspect. I think the Brontodon just seems so good right now.
And like the fact that like the Brontodon can chomp their Embercleave or their Calamity.
Totally. That's one of the things. Already it's big enough that it's like a problem for them. They can deal 4 some of the time, right? Sometimes, depending what they're set up as. It's costly. But the Embercleave insurance to me is just the nail in the coffin.
So, I mean, I think like Golgari Sacrifice with main deck Thrashing Brontodon instead of Mayhem Devil. I mean, if I were on that archetype, that's where I would start. I would definitely play Vraska though. I don't know that the blue splash is worth it to me, but I like the Great Henge. I like the Great Henge. It is really exciting. This deck is gonna get demolished by Casualties of War, though. It doesn't have any permission, or you can't stop them from drawing it.
It does look like it'll get demolished by Casualties of War.
Look at all my nice things; they're all in the graveyard. Like that is.
Dude, this deck looks like it will be so beloved by people watching it just before it loses to Casualties of War. You're going to be doing so much awesome stuff. Dude, we got to build the best Casualties of War deck. You talked me into it. I want to just play 4 Casualties of War now.
I am sold on the 4 Casualties.
Unless I play 4, I could actually imagine a blue-white deck or some kind of blue X control deck with Gatwick being even better. But 4 Casualties of War sounds phenomenal.
Like, do you remember when there were just like all different builds of like the blue-green Oko deck? Like, oh, let's play Maraleaf Pixies. And some people were like, oh, let's play this many Brazen Borrowers. Let's play main deck Questing Beasts. And then one day, people like Strosky and Peavy came and they're like, we're going to play main deck Mass Manipulation. And then nobody did anything different anymore because like all the cute stuff is just evaporated when it belongs to your opponent. Right? Like,
yeah.
Like, I think that's just the thing. Like, there's all kinds of cute stuff you can do until somebody casts Casualties of War. And then all your cute stuff is in the graveyard.
So what you're saying is I need to play more Mass Manipulations in my Gatwick decks. I could see that.
I think that Mass Manipulation is an extremely high-quality card in green decks. I think it is a utterly medium card in white decks. It's like
that's fair. Yeah, no, I think you're right.
It's insane in green decks.
That's true. And it's not just the Nissa. Obviously, the Nissa thing is just game winning. But like when you can get ahead with stuff, whether it's the goose or the parrot, anything. Yeah, you're right. You're right. All right, awesome, dude. Well, I look forward to seeing what kind of weirdo mono red deck you switch to, despite all this talk of Casualties of War.
No. I think I'm pretty sold on Casualties of War. Like it just seems like where you want to be.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play dredge, it's a jailer hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber stasis state. Lost a lot of friends, got left behind. Had to find a way not to lose my mind. Trapped in a vault with nothing but time. Parents and my friends were